Hey everyone, welcome to Hail to the Chief, Pursuing the American Dream. I'm a parent trying to figure out how to explain America to my kids. Not the textbook version where everything's sanitized and simple, not the cynical version where it's all corrupt and broken, the real version. Messy, complicated, sometimes inspiring, and sometimes horrifying. The best way to understand the country is to understand the 46 people who've held its highest office. So I'm reading about every single American president. All of them, from Washington to Trump. And I'm going to share what I learned to you. Because here's what I realized. We treat presidential elections like they're life or death. Every 4 years, it's the most important election of our lifetime. We invest so much hope and fear in one person. But why? What did the founders intend? What have we turned it into? And maybe most importantly, what do I want to teach my kids about all of this? So the first episode is about George Washington, and fair warning, we're going to talk about some uncomfortable things, because Washington was both most important president we've ever had and a man who owned more than 300 enslaved human beings. Both of these things are true, and if we can't hold both truths at once, we can't understand America at all. Let me start with a quote from historian Ron Chernow's biography, Washington, A Life. After Washington died, he became the subject of more than 400 printed orations. He was converted into exemplar of moral values, the person chosen to tutor posterity in patriotism, even a civic deity. And here's the problem. Washington's transformation into a sacred figure erased his tough, often moody nature, stressing only his serene composure and making it more difficult for future generations to fathom his achievements. We turned the man into a god, and in doing so, we made him impossible to understand. Think about it. When you picture George Washington, what do you see? Probably one of those portraits, right? The ones where he looks like he's made of wax, where he looks stiff and distant and almost inhuman. Now compare that to Abraham Lincoln. We have photographs of Lincoln. We can see every wrinkle, every hollow in his cheeks. We can watch him age through the Civil War. We can watch the weight of the presidency there on his face. Lincoln looks human. Washington looks like a marble statue. That's a problem because we need Washington to be human if we're going to learn anything from him. So I read Ron Chernow's biography, Washington, A Life, and he does something pretty remarkable with it. He uses Washington's own letters and diaries to show us the man beneath the myth, and that man is complex. Sometimes he's humble, sometimes vainglorious, sometimes charitable, petty. He starts off as a young colonel, mainly worried about his next promotion. Then he becomes an older president, trying to hold a frail nation together. Frail, fragile, probably more fragile. Chernow doesn't try to explain away Washington's contradictions or smooth over his rough edges, and he definitely doesn't give him a falsely redemptive arc. That's important because Washington doesn't get to be redeemed. He owned people. That's not a footnote. That's not something we can explain away. It's a defining feature of his life. But, and this is crucial, he also did something extraordinary. He walked away from absolute power twice. Both things, they're true. And just as a side note, Washington, yes, he owned the slaves, but each and every one of his slaves had a trade. Washington brought indentured servants over from Europe, and as part of their servitude contract, they had to teach their trade to his slaves. So among the slaves, there was blacksmiths, there were basket weavers, cooks, and you name it. They all had a skill which would be great later on when Washington frees them towards the end of his life. So what is the American dream, really? Let's tackle the first big question. What is it? And I don't mean the bumper sticker version, not work hard and you'll succeed, not the politician's speech about opportunity and prosperity. What has the American dream actually meant to different generations of Americans? For Washington's generation, it was about self-governance, the idea that common people could rule themselves without kings or aristocrats. That was revolutionary, literally. But they couldn't extend that dream to everyone. For the enslaved people that Washington owned, there was no dream, only survival for indigenous people. The American dream meant their nightmare. So Chernow paints Washington as a relatively kindly slave owner, not given to excessive cruelty, but then he immediately reminds us, kind or not, Washington owned people, and Washington was always surprised when enslaved people ran away. He couldn't understand why they wouldn't be grateful for his benevolence. Well, that's the American dream in its rawest form. The audacious belief that we can create something better, combined with spectacular blindness to our own hypocrisy. I guess the dream has evolved. Post-Civil War, a truly united nation, though Reconstruction did fail. In the early 1900s, there was prosperity and upward mobility. By the mid-1900s, suburban security, right, defeating communism. The late 1900s, when I was a kid, infinite economic growth, technological salvation. You really had the information boom then, and now, I'm not sure. Do we even agree what it is anymore? Some people want to restore an imagined golden age. Others want to finally fulfill promises that they long ago were deferred, right? And still others think that the whole thing was always a lie. Maybe the American dream was never real. But maybe the American dream is simply this: the belief that we can be better than we are. Not perfect, not pure, but better. And the willingness to do the hard, messy, often failing work of actually trying. Washington helped create a system where slavery could eventually be abolished, where his own actions could be judged by history, where we could have this conversation at all. Is that enough? I don't know, but it's something. So how important should a president actually be? We treat presidential elections like they're existential. But should one person have that much power over our hopes and fears? I mean, when did a president become a rock star? Washington? He wouldn't have wanted it this way. According to Chernow, Washington's greatest contribution as president was setting a precedent, not a president, a precedent for how the executive office should be handled. He proceeded cautiously, always aware that everyone after him would follow in his footsteps. The founders, they didn't want a king, they just fought a war against one, but they needed executive power. The Articles of Confederation had proven that. So they created something limited, intentionally constrained. The president wasn't supposed to be a monarch or a savior. He was supposed to be a steward, execute the laws, defend the nation, then go home. And Washington got it. When he left office after 2 terms, he was being absolutely savaged by political enemies. He could have stayed, but he chose not to. He went back to Mount Vernon. 2 years later, he was dead. It's probably because the 18th century doctors bled him of 5 pints of blood every day trying to cure a throat infection, but can you imagine? They actually bled him to death, right? Here's my point. Washington understood that the office was bigger than him. The precedent understood that the precedent mattered more than his ego. I promise it's the last time I'll make that joke. Now, look at what we've done. We've turned the presidency into everything. Father figure, symbol, scapegoat, transformational leader. We want our president to solve all of our problems, embody all of our values, protect us from all of our fears. We've made the office far more powerful than the founders intended, and then we're shocked when that power gets abused or proves insufficient. The truth is uncomfortable. A president should matter, but not as much as we've made them matter. Congress should be the main driver of American life. So should state and local governments. So should we, individually and collectively, taking our responsibility for our communities. We've made presidents too important because we've absolved ourselves of too much responsibility. Last question here. One that started this whole project. What do I tell my kids about America? I can't tell them it's perfect. Washington owned slaves, more than 300 people, right? It's not a detail, that's who he was. And Chernow notes that in his book, right, that Washington was the only founder who freed his slaves in his will, but he only freed them upon his death, and only his own slaves, not Martha's. And he did the right thing far too late, and only when it cost him nothing. But I also can't tell my kids that America is irredeemable because Washington did create something lasting. He did walk away from power. He did understand that he was setting precedents. Okay, I lied. The president set a precedent. I did it again. So here's what I want my kids to understand. First, America is a contradiction that occasionally works. We're founded on the ideals that we've never lived up to. Sometimes we make progress. Sometimes we backslide spectacularly. But the ideals remain. Complexity is not the enemy of truth. That's my second point. I'm going to say that again. Complexity is not the enemy of truth. Washington was both great and deeply flawed. He towered over his age and bent history like it was a blade of grass, but he also participated in evil. Both things are true. Understanding both makes his achievement more remarkable, not less. Third, institutions matter more than individuals. I'm going to say that again for anybody that's listening. Institutions matter more than individuals. Washington's genius wasn't in being perfect. It was in building something that could survive imperfect people. The Constitution, the precedents, the peaceful transfer of power. These things have proven more durable than any single president. And fourth, the work is never finished. Chernow reveals that Washington privately supported ending slavery, but publicly refused to take that stand. He knew it was wrong. He didn't have the courage to say it out loud, though. But he helped create a nation where, eventually, others would have that courage, where his legacy would be debated, where we could judge him, and that's what I want my kids to inherit. Not a myth, not cynicism, but an honest reckoning with what we, a nation of contradictions, are trying to become better. That we've been falling short again and again, but still trying. So is the American dream still alive? If we mean the simple version, work hard and you'll succeed, probably not. And maybe it never was, at least not for everyone. But if we mean the deeper dream, that we can govern ourselves, that we can improve, that our children can inherit something worth working on, then maybe it's alive the same way it was alive for Washington. Imperfectly, hypocritically, but genuinely. There's a line I wrote in my notes that keeps coming back to me. It's a small thing for a God to accomplish these tasks. Far harder is it to believe that relatively small-time Virginia planter with a bit of ambition, a bit of grit, and an incredible strength of spirit managed to shepherd a bloody revolution and hold together an infant nation. That's the American dream. Not that we're perfect, but that imperfect people can build something that outlasts their imperfections. George Washington was great. Not great in the modern sense, like George is a great guy. No, great in the sense that he towered over his age. He was not without his flaws, his participation in slavery being a massive one, but he helped create something lasting. He helped create a nation where his legacy could be furiously and passionately debated for all time. All right, I'm still figuring this out, this whole point of this project. 46 presidents, 46 imperfect people trying to navigate an impossible job in an imperfect nation. If I can understand them, all of them, maybe I can understand what this office means, what this country means, and what I owe my children by way of an explanation. I want to leave you with something Abigail Adams said about George Washington after his death. Remember, this is coming from somebody who knew him personally. She rebelled against all the idealized portraits and orations, saying, "Simple truth is his best eulogy." Simple truth. Not the myth. Not the marble statue. The truth. Complicated and uncomfortable as it is. That's what this podcast is about. Finding the simple truth of these 46 people and what they tell us about America. Next episode, we're talking about John Adams, a man who had to follow the marble statue and somehow remain human. He wanted desperately to be great, but wasn't quite good enough. And who, despite everything, helped keep this fragile experiment alive. Subscribe wherever you can, hit that like button, leave a review if you're feeling generous, and most importantly, think about what you would tell your kids about this country, because that's the conversation we all need to have. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, David, and this is Hail to the Chief, Pursuing the American Dream.